Hello and welcome back to Russ's Movie Corner. My name is Russ, and as you can see, I am sitting in front of my movie corner. I have a Star Wars t-shirt on because I do not have a James Bond t-shirt at all, or anything really apparel-wise that is James Bond, so to kind of show that I'm doing movies, I'm wearing a Star Wars t-shirt. I have my Live and Let Die movie right next to me, which means we are back doing the James Bond Retrospective. Today we are covering the first 5 of the 7 Roger Moore films. That's right, we're moving into the Roger Moore era, which is kind of the 70s through about the mid-80s. We're covering actually probably the strongest part of his library. There's a couple of films in here that are a little weak, but I think for the most part, these 5 films are probably the best that Roger Moore made out of the 7 that he did. And it's one of those things where, here again, on Her Majesty's Secret Service, on Her Majesty's Secret Service, Roger Moore was approached to play James Bond, and at the time he was doing a movie called The Saint. And because of that, he was not able to play the role. He just didn't have the time. He was like, "I'm sorry, guys. I would love to play James Bond, but I can't. Okay, I don't have the time commitment. I don't have the ability," because they had all these like clauses in the contract that basically said like you couldn't wear a tux, you couldn't wear this, you couldn't wear that, you couldn't appear in this, you couldn't appear in that. And so basically, he couldn't do any of that stuff, and so they kind of. And he was like, "Yeah, I can't do that, guys. I have this television show. I need to be able to do some of the stuff that you're telling me I can't do if I'm James Bond. And I don't want to dive out of this contract to go play James Bond and have all the fans of the TV show go, 'Why'd you do that?'" So after the TV show was canceled in the second or third season, he then was approached after Diamonds Are Forever to become James Bond. And so he's actually the oldest actor to ever play the role of James Bond to start and finish. He started at 57 and ended at 67, if memory serves. Where started in his 50s, ended in his 60s, basically. So yeah, he was one of the oldest guys to play the role. Okay? And after this, they tried to find guys that were younger, so that they could play the role a little longer and not have to worry about them, basically becoming so old that they looked like they were, a grandpa playing next to a 20-year-old, which we'll get to. So, Live and Let Die. This is, of course, based on the book of the same name. A lot of plot points were changed, actually, in this film. In the original one, they were trying to flood the market with gold because Mr. Big, the big bad of the book, was a Russian agent who was trying to tank the gold market by finding these gold Morgans, these doubloons, and flooding the market in America with them. Okay. Plus, some other things were changed. They added in a brand new character called Dr. Kananga, who was actually the villain, who was playing a dual role as a gangster called Mr. Big. And they had a lot of other things. They also kind of changed up the stereotype that was played around with in the book. Because, again, the book was written in the 50s. This was in the 70s. Blaxploitation had started with this film. The original Shaft was actually the same year as this one. Which is funny because the guy who plays with the hand in this film is in this one. Shaft's big score. Okay. It's let me see. It doesn't say who it was, but anyway, it's the same. It's the same guy that played. Yeah, because they don't have him in here. But anyway, it's the guy who played Tee-Hee. He's the guy that kind of laughs and stuff like that. In this film, plays detective or captain, not detective, Captain Bolin in this film. Okay. In fact, I actually had never actually seen Shaft's big score until I actually bought it, and then I started watching it, and I was like, "Wait a minute, that Captain Bolin, that's the guy from Live and Let Die." So yeah, it's definitely a different film from your normal Bond films. There was, for the first time, an African American woman as a Bond girl, and it featured, and this was after Star Trek, which featured the Uhura Kirk kiss. So this was the first time in the Bond series that we will see an interracial kiss between Bond and the black gal. And so that was kind of a first for the series. I don't think it's, well, actually, I guess we could say the first kind of interracial kissing we saw would be in You Only Live Twice, which featured Bond kissing some Asian girls. But this would have been the first time that we saw, like, again, an African-American woman with Bond and them kissing. Okay? Wouldn't be the last. Here's looking at you. Die another day. But it definitely was kind of one of the first, like, times that we got to see that, which was interesting. It was definitely different. Especially for, like I said, for this time in the 70s, when blaxploitation was kind of becoming a big thing, there was a lot more Hollywood productions, and even some British productions that were being made in Hollywood as well, that were basically kind of like breaking new barriers by trying to cast more people in these roles. And it was kind of interesting because Yaphet Kotto, who is the villain, Dr. Kananga in this film, would go on to star in Alien, the Ridley Scott 1979 movie. And he had a pretty big career in Hollywood for quite a number of years in the 70s and early 80s. And so, yeah, and like one of his first big roles was in Live and Let Die. So, yeah, he was an amazing, amazing actor. So, what's the plot? Well, glad you asked. So the plot, oh, and I forgot to mention this one little tidbit in the last part. This was the second of 3 times that Shirley Bassey would be doing the title sequence. She did Diamonds Are Forever, and she will go on to do another movie that we will talk about very soon. I only mention that because I'm going to mention the song here, and I mentioned some of the songs in the previous one, and so I wanted to make sure that I mentioned that because it's going to become important as we keep going. So, pre-credit sequence. We see some people getting killed off. Right onto like right out in the middle. Like we see these people getting killed off. And then we see we see this title sequence by Paul McCartney and the Wings called Live and Let Die. And it's probably one of the better Bond themes out there. Because, I mean, hey, it's Paul McCartney and the Wings. I mean, you know, what are you going to do? So, after that, M comes to Bond's apartment, or house, and we see him in the arms of an Italian Secret Service agent, Ms. Caruso. And so We also see that Bond has a cappuccino maker, which, assuming he got in Italy, they don't really say. And then he's told that he's going to go to New York to investigate some filet of sole restaurants, and he'll do some different things. Blah blah blah. Basically, Bond then shows up in New York, and subsequently his driver gets killed, and he almost gets into an accident. We see the first appearance of David Hedison as Felix Leiter. Now, Felix Leiter also appears in Diamonds Are Forever. I don't remember the actor's name right off the top of my head, and I don't have IMDb in front of me, so I can't look it up really fast. And he's been popping up frequently throughout the series. And so David Hedison played this in this one, and then he will play it again in License to Kill. It was the first time that the same actor played the same role as Felix Leiter. Up until now, different people had been playing Felix Leiter, and it would continue on through the series, because Felix will show up in other subsequent films played by different guys, and then in License to Kill they end up going back to David Hedison, who played it in this film. So they're keeping an eye on Dr. Kananga. Kananga knows, so he turns on a little thing. He starts to talk, and then he turns on a tape recorder, and then you see them getting changed. And then, so Bond goes to this shop, and it's right next to the embassy that Dr. Kananga has. And then basically, Bond kind of goes on some misadventures in Harlem, and finds this guy named Mr. Big, whom we don't know at the time is Dr. Kananga. We find out a little bit later on. So then he goes down to this island called San Monique. And San Monique is this sort of fictional island in the Caribbean that kind of stands in for a Jamaican island that they used in the book. I don't remember which Jamaican island it was, but it was there was an island that was just off the coast of Jamaica where Dr. No had set up, or I mean, not Dr. No, Mr. Big had set up a little island, getaway, basically, where he was basically digging out these chests of gold coins from old pirate ships and then dumping them on the American market again to devalue the gold. And so, basically, in this one, it's actually heroin smuggling. Okay, they have some poppy fields that they're growing on San Monique, and then what they're doing is that Kananga, his plot, you learn later on, is he's going to give it away. Okay, and when he gives it away, he basically gets new customers, and then drives all the other drug dealers out of business. Once he's hooked everybody on the heroin, then he'll start raking in the cash after all the other people are out of business. So Bond stops him. Okay. This is also Jane Seymour's first role. If you're familiar with Dr. Quinn, Medicine Woman, and a few other roles, this was Jane Seymour's first Hollywood role, is in Live and Let Die. And there is a bit of an aspect where Bond kind of takes advantage of her. She's technically a virgin in this show. I'm talking about the character of Solitaire, not Jane Seymour herself, but the character of Solitaire. And it's kind of interesting because I believe it's on this one. Yeah, there's a documentary that was done on the Casino Royale. This, you have to buy the actual DVD or the Blu-ray. It's called Bond Girls Are Forever, okay, where they talk to all of the Bond girls from Ursula Andress all the way through to Ava Green in Casino Royale. And I think they also talked to the other gal that played on the horse. I don't remember her name off the top of my head. But anyway, so they kind of have this this thing of all these different Bond girls, and when they're talking to them, like Jane Seymour, the host, who was a Bond girl herself, and I can't remember which one it was off the top of my head, but she was talking to like Jane Seymour. She goes, "Well, isn't it kind of funny that like Roger Moore's character actually kind of like beds you without your consent? Like, isn't that kind of weird? Like, this was before Me Too. This was before anything." And she goes, "Yeah, it was a little strange. Like, wasn't really paying attention to that, but now that you mention it, you're kind of right. Like, that was kind of like a shady kind of thing to do. Like, it was pretty bad." Which, going back and watching it again, I was kind of like, "Oh yeah, okay, I can kind of see where they're coming from." You know, it's like he kind of uses a tarot deck to kind of make her. He like stacks the tarot deck with a whole bunch of the same card, so that when she pulls it out, she like thinks that, it's like he's, that they're supposed to be lovers, and then he takes her to bed. And so a lot of people have seen that as Bond sort of like tricking her into bed, which is a form of non-consensual sex in a way. Not on like a date grape level, but like probably one or two levels around that. Like, it's not necessarily above board, because he's not. I mean, it isn't until after they've already had sex that he tells her the deck was heavily stacked in his favor. Like, basically, he stacked the whole deck with the lovers cards. Um, you know, and like, so she doesn't. Yeah, she doesn't understand. Like, I mean, she understands, and I think she's okay with it because she'd been actually looking for a way out for a long time, and so you kind of understand that towards the end of it, she's kind of come to grips with it. Like, she's okay with him doing that because he was kind of her way out of from underneath Kananga. Because the only way is when she started to lose the power is that basically Kananga would have sex with her, and then like the child that she would produce would be a child that they would then groom to follow in Solitaire's footsteps. And it happened to her mom, and it happened to her, and she was trying to find a way out from that cycle because she was essentially a slave. For Kananga. She was just kind of, and she kind of saw what he was doing, and she realized that she needed an out. And when Bond came, she realized, oh, here's my chance. Which is why she tries to protect him throughout the whole entire thing. If you actually go back and watch the film, she's actually protecting him a lot. And so, yeah, it's an interesting thing. They actually did there was actually a gator farm, I think it was in Florida, where they actually filmed a part where a guy who actually owned the farm dressed up like Roger Moore and actually like ran across the backs of some gators that he bred, and they actually put Roger Moore out on this little island amidst all these gators, and did some things there with him. The guy who owned the gator farm was there the whole entire time. He was actually like off screen, like throwing chickens at the gators just to keep away from him. There was only like a couple of them that actually ever came up onto the island. When one would get too close, the guy would trank it. They would call cut, and then the guy would trank it, and then they would pull that. They would pick that gator up and kind of set him on a bank far away, and then throw some more chickens out, and then maybe like lure one or two back. So it was very controlled conditions. But to do the thing where he actually steps across the backs of the things, that was actually done. Like, this was way before they did before they would have ever done anything else. They didn't have CGI back then, so it's like it was practical. You had to do it. So like literally that was what they did. So yeah, it was pretty amazing. And it's a good Bond film. If you ever have a chance to really sit down and watch it, it's a very, very good film. Yaphet Kotto is a very, very good Bond villain, and I'm glad he was able to do that. Alrighty. Man with the Golden Gun. This is the actual last book that was written by Ian Fleming. The book itself was written as a Bond at the end of You Only Live Twice in the novel series. Okay, Bond was on an island with Kissy Suzuki. He had no memory. The KGB finds him. The upshot of it is the KGB finds him, and they train him up. Okay, and they start to give him back his memory. He starts to piece together some things, but they start to put some brainwashing in his head, and then they send him as an assassin to go kill M. And they send him to a rehab facility where they kind of get rid of the brainwashing. And then they send him after a pistol marksman by the name of Francisco Scaramanga, a.k.a. the Man with the Golden Gun. Now, interestingly enough, in the book, the Golden Gun was a golden-plated Colt single-action army. Okay? Which actually kind of makes an appearance. The Colt Single Action Army does. In the film. But they decided that they wanted to have the Golden Gun be a collapsible thing that you would never know. It'd be just a bunch of ordinary objects that you would be able to fit together, and then it looked like a gun. And then you'd fire it, and then you could pull it all back apart. It's done, right? And so they did that. They actually designed a gun that was fashioned out of a pen, a lighter, and like a cigarette case or something like that. It had like 3 different parts on it that would fit together, and Christopher Lee was told how to make it all fit together. Okay. And you actually see him assemble it at one point in the actual movie, and then fire it, and then he disassembles it, and then you see him putting it back in his coat pocket when he's done. Very fascinating how they did it. Really, really interesting. Christopher Lee, the late great Christopher Lee, who played Saruman in The Lord of the Rings. Also played Count Dooku. Played Dracula in the Hammer films. He is the villain in this film. Francisco Scaramanga. Amazing. Absolutely amazing. In fact, I really enjoyed him as the villain in this film. Roger Moore's second outing is a little bit more of a campy versus Live and Let Die. Live and Let Die was a very basic Bond film, whereas this one is more of a sort of like more of a camp fest. Okay? There's a lot of campy moments. Now, in Live and Let Die, there was a boat chase through the Louisiana Bayou, and they used a guy by the name of Clifton James, who played Sheriff J.W. Pepper. And they brought him back in this film as sort of a comedic relief that kind of goes on a little bit of an adventure with Bond through Thailand. And like I said, this is where the Bond girls started getting really, really, really funky names, okay? Now, Mary Goodnight was an actual character, I believe, in the book. I haven't actually read the book in a long, long time. I read it once, a really long time ago, and I haven't read it since, and I don't remember. In fact, I could probably look it up really quick here. Let me see. Okay. Let me see. Is Mary Goodnight? Doesn't say. Yeah. Doesn't say. So, anyway. So, there's a character named Mary Goodnight in here, which, of course, her name kind of becomes a little bit of a pun later on in the movie at the very end. There's also, if you've ever seen the show Fantasy Island, the little person known as Hervé Villech, I can't ever say his last name. Villechines, I think is his name. He's a French. And I can never pronounce his last name. It is the weirdest name. But anyway, he played in Fantasy Island. And he was the one that would go, "Boss, the plane." He plays Scaramanga's, like, manservant in this movie. Okay? And he, basically, like, wants to kill Scaramanga, but at the same time is always kind of treating it as a game. Like, he doesn't actually want Scaramanga to die because he likes the challenge of being able to try to outwit Scaramanga. In fact, that's the actual pre-credit sequence. Is you see a guy from Diamonds Are Forever as a hitman come to try to take out Scaramanga, and Scaramanga kills him. And then at the very end, he turns around and blows away the fingers off of a statue of James Bond. Okay? Which is kind of the impetus for why people think that he's after them. Fun fact, this was Maud Adams' first Bond film. She would come back in Octopussy as the titular character. And she... in this one, she plays a character... that's sort of like a second, not a second, but she's sort of like Scaramanga's mistress. And she, like, wants out, and so she sent 007 a gold bullet with his number stamped on it, because she figured if he could kill Scaramanga, they could, do that. And behind everything is a MacGuffin called a Solex agitator. Now, at the time that this movie came out, there was kind of a worldwide gas shortage. There was kind of some people who were kind of getting on nuclear power as being very unsafe and very nasty. And let me see, this was 73? Let me see here. I can't remember. Was this 73? Erg. $1974. So it was 1974. So I believe it was right around the time of the 3 Mile Island incident. I could be wrong. But there was a lot of kind of drive towards, like, trying to find some kind of an alternative to nuclear power, hydroelectric power, all this kind of stuff. And so the MacGuffin of the story is a thing called a Solex agitator. And basically what it was supposed to do was it was supposed to take sunlight and convert it into energy, like an unlimited energy source. And, like, there needed to be these, like, storage vats that had, like, liquid nitrogen in them, and you couldn't do anything, and blah, blah, blah. And so, yeah, basically there was this whole big plot around that. And basically what ended up happening is that the man with the golden gun basically wanted to retire as a hitman and essentially become the world's foremost leader on energy production. And he was basically going to charge governments exorbitant amounts of money to come out and copy his design for the Solex and for the power plant and everything like that. And then they would fly back to their home countries and then rebuild everything. And then he would finally, for an exorbitant fee, give them a copy of the Solex agitator, essentially give them the plans for it so that they could put that in the little MacGuffin machine and make it so that they could do whatever they wanted to. And essentially Bond put an end to his plan. And then And so it's a fairly decent Bond film from standpoint, but here again, probably my top 15 out of the 25. It's definitely not. It's definitely one of the weaker entries in the series. It's not. It gets kind of preachy about certain types of things. But Christopher Lee is an amazing villain. And if you've seen Lord of the Rings, you've seen Star Wars, you've seen the Hammer films, Christopher Lee is just an amazing villain. And I know that like a lot of people know the story where when he was hired to play in Lord of the Rings, he actually came up to Peter Jackson and was like, "I should be Gandalf." And he was kind of like, "I understand that, but we've already got a Gandalf," because at that time they'd hired Ian McKellen, and he goes, "We wanted you as Saruman." And he's like, "But Peter, I've actually met J.R.R. Tolkien. I've actually, I read these books every year. I should be playing Gandalf because I understand the character." And he's like, "We understand that. We have a Gandalf." So he ended up playing Saruman, even though he wanted to play Gandalf. And I think, honestly, his portrayal of Saruman is amazing. And I loved him in The Hobbit. I thought he was really good in The Hobbit. It's like, especially with his disdain for Radagast the Brown. His excessive consumption of mushrooms. Which was kind of a plot point in the original Lord of the Rings. All right. Now on to a lot of people's personal favorite Bond films, especially from the Roger Moore era. The Spy Who Loved Me. Okay. This Bond film features Kurt Jurgens as the villain, and it was the first appearance of two, actually three, since we'll be getting to Everything or Nothing eventually, of Richard Kiel as Jaws. Now, this is his live-action appearance. That appearance was more digital, so I don't necessarily count it. I know he was credited with it, but I don't believe Richard Kiel actually did anything. I think he just allowed his likeness. I think they just contacted him and said, "Hey, we want to put you in this game. We're going to use like your appearance from like Spy Who Loved Me and Moonraker as reference, and we're going to put you in this game, and we will credit you if that's okay." He doesn't actually speak, and I think he just said, "Yeah, go ahead." But yeah, this was Richard Kiel's first appearance as Jaws. This also features Barbara Bach as Agent Anya Amasova, also known as Agent Triple X. Go figure. Here again, they had to figure that every single name that Ian Fleming ever chose had to have some sexual connotation to it, which it really didn't. But again, they missed that when they went to go make some of these names. Okay. This is also Walter Gottell's second appearance in the Bond series, but his first appearance as General Gogol. Okay, the head of the KGB, opposite of M in the thing. And in fact, we actually get to see M and Gogol on the screen at the same time, and you see their relationship. It's like, after you, it's like, after you, Gogol. No, after you, Miles. And it's like, yeah. And so you kind of get this whole kind of like, they have this kind of a relationship. It was a really nice moment on the film. And so it was a really interesting film because there's, again, at the heart of this, there was a submarine tracking system that could track basically Polaris missile subs, or, basically what we would call Trident missile subs. Okay, they are ballistic missile subs, and at the heart of it is a tanker that can swallow things whole. Okay. And essentially, like, that's kind of the beginning of the whole thing, is that these guys are on this submarine and they're doing some things, and then the submarine gets forced up to the surface, and then you see where they're doing this whole entire thing, and then Bond, Agent Triple X and her lover are sitting in a bed, and he gets up and goes, "I need to go to Austria." And then she's like, and she opens it up, and it's like, "Agent Triple X, Agent Triple X respond, and then she like says, "This is Agent Triple X," blah blah blah, and then Bond is in a cabin with a woman, and he gets a little thing, little ticker tape that comes out that basically says, "Urgent, you know, come back to London, 007." So he's like, and she's like, "But James, I need you." And he's like, "So does England." And then he walks out and he's like skiing down the hill. This was actually the one where they did a stunt where a guy actually flies off the hill, kicks off the skis, and then pulls the parachute, and the big Union Jack parachute comes out. And it took him like I remember that they were talking about the stunt because I was watching some of the special features on it, and they were talking about the stunt, and it actually took him like a couple of tries to get it right, in that the guy, when he would kick the thing away, he would have to wait for those to kind of like fall away too far, and so he would get too far down. For when he opened up the chute, it didn't look right on the camera, and so they finally got it to the point where he was able to kind of kick it away, but if you watch, you can kind of see one of the skis actually like hits the canopy as it's opening and then kind of bounces away. So it was a very risky stunt what they did, but it was kind of one of those iconic moments in the series. And essentially, basically, because these two submarines went missing, Bond kind of comes up and he puts a thing, and you see the first appearance also of Defense Minister Frederick Gray, who would go on to appear in the series pretty regularly up until, I believe it was For Your Eyes Only. I think it was kind of the last appearance of him. As his character kind of got stale. It was also the first appearance of Robert Brown, who would end up in Octopussy, becoming M and playing M all the way through License to Kill, which he was then replaced with Judi Dench, who played it all the way through Skyfall. But anyway, so it was a first appearance of him before he was M, okay? Now, his M is still the same character, because how they wrote that was Bernard Lee ended up dying at the end of Moonraker, or shortly after Moonraker was released. And so when For Your Eyes Only came out, they had M on leave. And then basically when Robert Brown came back, they and played M, they just had him step in, and he played the same character of Miles Maservini. Which is kind of where they got the name M from. So, Spy Who Loved Me. So Bond goes to Egypt to see a man named Fekish, to try to get a thing, to try to get the tracking plans. All the while, they're being pursued, like all these people are being pursued by this hitman known as Jaws, okay? Under the direction of Kurt Jurgen's bad guy, Karl Stromberg. And Stromberg basically wants to start a nuclear war because he figures that if he irradiates the surface, people will have to move down onto the sea bottom to essentially live under the ocean, which is a plot point that will come back shortly. So essentially, Bond is trying to prevent that from happening. And there is a huge tanker battle on the Leparis, which is amazing because it was actually one of the largest sets they ever constructed on the 007 stage. In fact, I believe the 007 stage had burned down shortly before this movie went into production, so they had just built a brand new 007 stage, which was like bigger than the previous 007 stage. And so to take advantage of that, because if you remember from You Only Live Twice, the big volcano layer was built on the 007 stage. The Leparis was twice as long as that one. Wasn't as high, but it was twice as long. And so it just kind of went to show off like just how big this thing was. And it also went They also had the little like boats or whatever that allowed them to like travel back through like a little tunnel, and then they had some areas in the back of the set. So not only did they have the big set with a big tank of water underneath it, okay, that was about 3 or 4 feet deep, they also had like a second level to that, and then they had a control room in the back, and then behind that they had a bunch of areas where they had an armory, and they had a couple of prisoner areas, and they had a bunch of other things, and they had all this stuff. I mean, it was just amazing what they did with all these things. And it was all built practically. Like, there was nothing about it that was done, in different ways. So essentially, they prevent World War III. Anya gets captured by Stromberg, and so Bond goes to Atlantis, which is Carl Stromberg's little offshore kind of area. His offshore base. Rescues Anya, and then they escape as they're going, and then it kind of continues the tradition of Bond, saying things like, keeping the British end up, sir. So yeah, it was détente and that kind of stuff, and so he's saying, it's like, doing stuff like that. So yeah, there was a bunch of different things in this film that kind of made their way into the Bond series. The first of which was the almost unbeatable henchman, which was brought back from Goldfinger because Oddjob was kind of the unbeatable henchman that Bond had to use some ingenuity by taking the bowler hat and throwing it into a bunch of steel bars, and then basically shoving it into shoving a cable into it to electrocute the man. But Jaws was kind of the first one to be sort of the mainstream unbeatable villain. Like, the guy that just you could not beat. Like, and for some odd reason, I don't know why, they always had Roger Moore, like, socking him in the jaw. And then going, bang, oh, it's like, really? You think you learn after the first or second punch, It's like, yeah, maybe I shouldn't punch this guy in the jaw. But anyway, so that would be a trope that would really start in this film and then kind of continue on throughout the whole entire series, where you had these kind of unbeatable henchmen that, took a while to beat. Like, it took some brains or some ingenuity to kind of outwit. Okay? And that trope really started with The Spy Who Loved Me and then kind of continues on through the series. All right. Now, a lot of people are going to hate this, but this is my personal favorite Bond film out of the Roger Moore series, and it's my second favorite Bond film of all time. In fact, this was the Bond film that got me interested in the Bond franchise, and that is Moonraker. Okay? Now, this movie came out in 1979. 2 years before that, a little-known film that you've probably never heard of came out. There's a reason why I'm wearing a Star Wars t-shirt and not like a Marvel t-shirt or something like that, is because this has a connection with this. Because the producers saw Star Wars and went, how can we get Bond into space? Because the original Moonraker had nothing to do with space. It had everything to do with a rocket, but it had nothing to do with space. Okay? So the teaser is that a shuttle is being delivered to the Americans. It's called a Moonraker space shuttle. And this was back when the space shuttle program was just taking off in America. And so to get people hyped about it, they used the space shuttle design for the actual characters of, for the actual Moonraker shuttle. And the the shuttle gets taken. Thing gets blown up. A 747 that's transporting it gets blown up, and they and so Bond is pulled off from assignment, but he ends up almost getting killed. Um, where they do some parachute antics and they have some midair fighting, and Jaws tries to bite Roger Moore's ankles, and then he gets kicked off, and then when he tries to like pull the thing, he tries to fly like a bird, and it doesn't work. Of course, he lands in a big top, and he survives. But it was just it was starting to show how campy the series was starting to become with things. But essentially, what ends up happening is that when they did this film, this was actually Shirley Bassey's third and final time doing the Bond themes. Was Moonraker. Okay, so she did Goldfinger, she did Diamonds Are Forever, and then she did Moonraker. Okay, and honestly, like a lot of people, think that Goldfinger was her best effort. And honestly, Goldfinger's okay. I actually like this one out of all three. I actually like this one best. I think this is her best effort. And it's an amazing thing. It was also kind of an interesting thing. And then Michael Lonsdale plays Hugo Drax. Now in the book, Hugo Drax was a guy that was found. His whole world had been kind of turned upside down. He was kind of a guy who was not kind of brash. Michael Lonsdale's Drax is a very smooth, suave, almost Bond-esque type character. Like he's a very, very like suave and debonair. He's always got women around him. He's very rich, and he's got all this stuff. And so Bond goes to California. Now they filmed some parts in France, but other parts in America. And some parts were filmed on sound stages. But they have Bond investigating the disappearance of this shuttle. And in doing that, he meets Lois Chiles, plays Dr. Holly Goodhead. Again, they totally missed why the Bond girls were named the way they were. They just named them random things because they thought they had to be sexual in some way. Which just, it's like, come on, guys. At this point, you're just getting ridiculous. Now, this wouldn't always be the trope because, like, for instance, Pam Bouvier in License to Kill was not named that way. They didn't always do that, but it seems like whenever they wanted to come up with some kind of a female name that had to do something, where they wanted to make him a provocative looking Bond girl, they had to do this trope. Now, this was the second time in a row, actually, that the Bond girl was not just a damsel in distress. The first in The Spy Who Loved Me, like Triple X was a hardened KGB agent. She knew exactly what she was doing. She could kick butt with Bond. Lois Chiles's Holly Goodhead was a CIA agent placed with Hugo Drax. She could hold her own. She could kind of fight. She could do some things. I mean, there's actually a point where when they're up on the space station, she's literally like kicking three guys' butts while Bond is just kind of sitting back, And so it was kind of a thing where I think they were trying to kind of make it so that Bond didn't have to beat everybody. so that you actually had some people that could hold their own with Bond in these situations. Okay. And so, um, and they filmed this in Venice. They filmed this in, California and France, and they filmed it kind of in some places kind of in Brazil. And so they did a really good job. Like, it's one of the reasons why I like it. The space parts of it are only like the very last like 10-20 minutes of the film. There's really not much there. And basically, what is the plot? Well, the plot is that Hugo Drax is a supremacist. He wants his perfect race, a master race. Have we heard this before? He's not a Hitler enthusiast, okay? He is literally just, he wants a master race, okay? And he wants so he's training up these like physical specimens, and they're from all over the world. I mean, there's black girls, there's Asian girls, there's white girls, there's Mexican girls, there's like and there's black guys and white guys and Hispanic guys and different people from all over the world. So it's not like he only has like the Aryan race or just blacks or just Hispanics or whatever. It's all different type of people. But what he's doing is he's kind of making these perfect physical specimens, and then he's going to breed them and then have their children come back after he's killed everybody off with this toxin, this kind of a nerve toxin. Okay. That we see in the story. That's kind of the MacGuffin of the story, is this like nerve toxin. And it's basically, he put this like satellite up in orbit. Well, they call it a satellite, but it's really like a space station up in orbit. And then essentially it has like this radar jamming thing that's basically like whenever a radar signal comes up, it intercepts the signal and then scatters it so that the radar, so that people on Earth don't know it's there. Okay. And so, essentially, Bond and Dr. Goodhead go up to the thing, and they end up making friends with Jaws, and they end up kind of stopping the whole plot, and then they end up blowing up these 3 globes that threaten millions of people, and they save the world. And it kind of ends on one of my favorite Bond jokes, where it's like a lot of times people would say about SEX, they would say, hey, take me around the world in the back of your car, or do this, or take me around the world. And so like they're in an actual space shuttle in orbit, and Dr. Goodhead goes, James, and he's like, I think it's time to go home. And she's like, take me around the world one more time. And he's like, why not? That's one of my favorite lines in the whole series. I love this film. It's a great film, and you have to admire the campiness of it. And because they did this, a lot of critics kind of were like, okay, this is getting ridiculous, guys. Now, Bond in space, come on. What are we doing here? And so, for the next outing, for your eyes only, they decided to bring Bond back down to Earth. And they did so in such a way that Bond is now kind of getting back to what made Bond Bond. Okay? They're trying to bring Bond back down and kind of get him back on track with the normal Bond film tropes. So this is where we need to bring in Never Say Never Again. Now, if you saw my introduction video, okay, to this series, and if you haven't, I suggest that you go back and watch it, because I kind of touch on this controversy a lot. After Thunderball, Kevin McClory was made a producer. He was kind of done this whole thing. I believed he thought he was going to, going forward, be a producer like Broccoli and Saltzman were. When that didn't materialize, and he saw the finished product of Thunderball, because he wasn't really heavily involved in the project. He was more just kind of brought on because he had written the Spectre organization and the Blofeld character and a couple of other aspects of the organization with Ian Fleming. Even though it's like Ian Fleming had credit on the book cover, and then on the inside page, on the inside title page, it said from a story by Kevin McClory and Ian Fleming. Because Ian Fleming had the story of what he wanted Thunderball to be, Kevin McClory came to him and said, hey, you should probably have this organization. I've come up with this organization called Spectre. It's really interesting. And so they had kind of a conversation about that, and Ian Fleming said, okay, let's do it. And so they did it, and then when it was made into a Bond film, Kevin McClory was made as a producer, was tasked as a producer. He was even given a writing credit on the thing because he had kind of helped try to craft the story. But Jack Whittingham and one other writer had kind of had been brought on to kind of polish the script, change a few things. And Kevin McClory was not happy with it. He hated Thunderball, notoriously. So he sued Eon Productions, okay? Which is why they killed off the character of Blofeld in Diamonds Are Forever. Okay, I didn't mention that in the last video. I was saving it until now because I wanted you to know. And fast forward to about 1979, 1980, okay? Kevin McClory won the rights from the courts to remake Thunderball as he saw fit. So he went out, notoriously, talked to Sean Connery to come out of retirement and essentially play James Bond again, okay? Because he played it in Thunderball, he played James Bond in Thunderball, so he thought, hey, why don't you come out and play James Bond? The producers considered that an affront. So, in the pre-credit sequence to this film, okay, we see Blofeld, again, neck brace, sitting in a wheelchair. Because of the events of Diamonds Are Forever, we assumed he died, but he actually didn't. He lived in the Bond universe, and then he was dropped unceremoniously down a smokestack. Because that was the producers basically saying, Blofeld is dead. We are killing him, okay? It's done. He is done. He's dead. And so Kevin McClory basically hired Irvin Kershner. Yes, that Irvin Kershner, the same one that directed 1980's Empire Strikes Back, to direct Never Say Never Again. Now, this movie failed at the box office because it is dismal. They make fun of everything, like the gadgets hardly work. The stuff that the gadgets that Q Branch makes are horrible. Q Branch is in a dingy basement, and Q has stuffed sinuses and all these other things. It is a dismal, dismal film. Now, interestingly enough, this is Kim Basinger's first role. And I was not a huge fan of her in this film because here again, kind of like with Roger Moore and what happened, and we'll get into this more in the next part, but he is so old in this production. And she's in her 20s. And it seems like you have her grandfather on screen with her kind of, and I'm just saying that as he's in his 60s now. Okay? Roger Moore's kind of in his kind of late 50s at this point, maybe early 60s. The age hasn't really gone up to him yet, and they're using women that are a little older opposite him, probably in their 30s, to play opposite him, so they don't look so young compared to him. But when you take a person who is that young and you put them on screen with a guy that old, you can't help but go, wow, really? Why? And so, yeah, this movie is dismal. I mean, it's good in that if you don't mind some of the plot points being the way they are, and you get Max von Sydow acting like a complete, bad guy, chomping at the bit, twirling his mustache, it's kind of funny. But it's still, in my opinion, like the worst film out of all of them. I think I would rather watch the CBS Climax version of Casino Royale 100 times over than watch that film, because it is so dismal. But anyway, so that's the pre-credit sequence for Your Eyes Only, was in response to Never Say Never Again, because this movie was notorious because Kevin McClory was saying, oh, it's going to be better than all the Eon Productions. And it was horrendous. And people were like, and actual Bond fans were like, what are you smoking? Like, literally, what are you smoking? Because, I mean, it was just a horrendous Bond film. It's kind of like when you look at... Where's my Dolph Lundgren Punisher? When you look at this version of the Punisher, the Dolph Lundgren 1989-1990 Punisher movie, okay? Which is a good action film. It is really good. Dolph Lundgren is very good as a very kind of haunted, seeking vengeance kind of guy. But it's not the Marvel character of the Punisher. Okay? That's the same thing with Never Say Never Again. Okay? It is not James Bond. It's a mediocre action film that just happens to have a James Bond skin slapped on it. Okay? And keep in mind that, like, Blofeld isn't even the head of Spectre. It's Maximilian Largo, the main villain. Which, if you remember from Thunderball, Largo was number 2. He was second in line. But in this one, they make him the head of Spectre, and he's the one running the plot. Which doesn't make much sense. Why would the head of Spectre be the one trying to do this? If anything, he's supposed to be the guy that is, kind of behind the scenes, directing everybody else. Isn't that the point of your Spectre character? The number one? Isn't he supposed to be the guy that, like, directs, like, pulls the strings? It just doesn't make much sense. Anyway, I got off on way too much of a tangent there. Sorry about that. Let's jump back on with For Your Eyes Only. So then we jump in. So after Bond unceremoniously drops Blofeld into a smokestack, okay, we see the title screen, and this is the first and only time that we get to see the person, the singer, on screen. It's Sheena Easton, who is an 80s pop icon, singing For Your Eyes Only. It is a really decent Bond song, and she actually appears on screen. Okay? So, what's the plot? Well, interestingly enough, General Veers, prepare your men, is the villain. Julian Glover, the man who played General Veers, is the villain in the film. He is trying to get the British Secret Service to wipe out his competition, played by a Greek actor known as Topol. Another fun Bond connection fact: the woman that plays Liesel in this film, sort of the mistress of Columbo, Milos Columbo, the Topal's character, was, at the time, Pierce Brosnan's wife. She ended up passing away tragically very early on in their marriage. And then Pierce Brosnan didn't get married again for a while, and I can't remember who he got married to after that, but it took him a while before he finally got married again. And I believe it wasn't until he was actually in the Bond series and he was actually kind of doing some stuff there that he finally married another woman. But it was just one of those things where he just unfortunately had a lot of issues because of that, and that wasn't why he decided not to play Bond. When we get to that point, I'll kind of explain what happened there. But basically, his wife is in this film. Okay, so anyway, so they have, and it's kind of a callback to On Her Majesty's Secret Service. Now, in the opening sequence, they actually have Bond at the grave of Tracy. That was one of the ways that they were trying to connect this back to the fact that, okay, this is Blofeld, and we're killing Blofeld, and Bond is doing it because it's like, yeah, screw you, buddy, you killed my wife, now you're dying, okay? And the producers were like, we thought we did this in Diamonds Are Forever, but I guess we're going to do it again, and we're just going to make sure that he's permanently dead this time, so we're going to drop him down a smokestack. Anyway, so they also have, they have a woman named Melina, played by, Carole Bouquet. She was a French actress who had done a couple of movies over here in America. And she's, like, her parents get killed, and so she goes after, like, these guys. And there was also a professional skater by the name of Holly Lynn Johnson, which I didn't know that at the time. It wasn't until I was watching some of the special features when I was watching through the Bond series getting ready for this this retrospective, that she was an actual figure skater, because they wanted somebody who could skate and then they could kind of show how to act on screen. And it shows, because she really doesn't know how to act in a lot of her scenes. And so, and she's also another one of those, like, damsels in distress kind of person. Like, when somebody slaps her, she just kind of, falls over in a heap, and, it's pretty bad. But Melina Havelock, played by Carole Bouquet, is an actual strong, like, here again, this is the third of the ones where now we're getting into these ones where we have these females that are not just damsels in distress. And yes, while I say there is one who is kind of a damsel in distress, she's not the main Bond girl. Okay, let's put it that way. And we'll get to that in the next video, because coming up there is one where it's kind of like, oh my god, I cannot believe you did this. After you had so many films with all these strong female leads, and then you finally go back to this? Like, what? So weird. But anyway, the MacGuffin of this story is a thing called an ATAC. Okay, it's an automatic targeting attack computer, I think is what it was stood for. And basically what this thing is it's a little tiny computer that they can type in, and then they can figure out where things are, and then they send it back to a main thing, and they're supposed to destroy it if the ship comes under attack, because there's like this little spy ship, and it gets sunk off the coast of Albania, which of course at the time was still under Soviet control. And so they had to do things covertly, and that's why Melina's parents were killed. And again, Bernard Lee had passed away after Moonraker. It was a very, very sad day for a lot of Bond fans, because he was M. I mean, he had played M since Dr. No, and it's like he passed away. And so a lot of people weren't sure what they were going to do with the character of M, which, again, they hired Robert Brown, who had played in Spy Who Loved Me, and Just kept him the same character. Okay. And so they had like a minister, almost like a Bill Tanner type character, who was kind of filling in for M while M was on leave, and then they still had the minister Frederick Gray, which I think this was his last performance as. I'd have to go back and check that again, but I'm pretty sure this was his last performance as that character. Which was kind of good because it's like he's more comedic relief rather than being a serious character. I mean, it's like that's kind of how far they had gone with the camp. Now, this was actually one of Roger Moore's personal favorite films, and it's actually one of my like stronger Roger Moore films and what I consider to be some of his best, along with Live and Let Die and Moonraker, and to some extent The Spy Who Loved Me. But I think this movie is a little bit better than The Spy Who Loved Me in many cases. There's a lot less camp. I mean, there's camp, but there's a lot less of it, okay? There's also a lot more moments where Bond is in peril, like actual peril, not just standing aside or brushing aside his hair as things are blowing up around him. Which is something that the series kind of became known for, was Bond, you know, it's like explosions going on all around, and Bond just kind of standing there like Superman going... And there's a lot less of that in here, okay? There's also a moment where Bond, like, is standing there, and General Gogol comes up and, like, holds out his hand for the ATAC. And you see Bond kind of stand there, and then he kind of stops, and he turns around and he looks at Melina, and then he turns around and then he throws it off a cliff. That was awesome. Because his thing is that he turns around to General Gogol and he goes, "Neither of us have it, comrade." Meaning that probably wasn't the only ATAC, but that means that the Russians won't have access to it. And the Russians can't say, "You kept it from us. You know, we had an opportunity to spy on your ATAC system, and you stole it from us. You kept it from us." Because he destroyed it. Which I thought was an awesome thing for Bond to do. It was a great compromise to the end of the movie. And I thought that was something that was like amazing for Bond to do. Was just he turns and just pitches it off the side of the mountain. I was sitting there going, dude, that's awesome. Yes. That's what we like to see in our James Bond. Okay. And so yeah, they tried to bring the series back to what made Bond great during the Sean Connery era, and kind of the first few Roger Moore films, is bring Bond back down to Earth, literally, to where he is now just doing these things. They also had some ski chasing. They had some car chases. They had some different things. I mean, it was really good. I mean, they did a very good job. So yeah, it's a great film. And so that comes to the end of the good Roger Moore films. Now we're going to kind of get into the very, very campy, very, like, just, I wish that Roger Moore had quietly retired after this film. I really do. I love the man. He's a wonderful actor, but I wish that he had quit after this, because the next two Bond films are horrible. The next two, and the two, so the next two Roger Moore films, Octopussy and A View to a Kill, and Living Daylights and License to Kill, we will discuss in the next part. Okay, this has been part 3. I didn't mention that at the beginning, but this is part 3 of my James Bond retrospective. Okay, me kind of giving my opinion about the series and kind of talking about some of the plots and some of the behind-the-scenes stuff that was going on, and also kind of talking about that travesty. Never Say Never Again. I said in the beginning part of that one that we would get to that, because it's an integral part of what was going on behind the scenes with the Spectre characters, with various other things, And it was the reason why they called the organization the Octopus, which, if you've ever played these two Bond games from GoldenEye, Rogue Agent, and From Russia with Love, you'll know that they called the organization the Octopus, okay, or Octopus, all right? And that was because Spectre had the octopus ring, and it became prevalent in the Thunderball, and they didn't really use it that much in You Only Live Twice, Honor Majesty's Secret Service, and Diamonds Are Forever. But it was something that the game makers and even the guys in the RPG that was made in the 80s kind of latched onto. Okay? So, yeah, this game's pretty good. It's a repetitive first-person shooter, so if you're not into those, you might not like it. But for what it is, it's actually a pretty decent game. This one I've already covered. It is really good. I recommend it. But anyway, so I hope that you understand now why some of that stuff was going on behind the scenes. And we'll continue to kind of go through, as we go through some of the things, we'll continue to talk about what was going on behind the scenes with Eon Productions and with the Kevin McClory estate, so that when we get to the Daniel Craig series, it'll make a lot more sense with what was going on, why they kind of retconned the Quantum organization into Spectre. Okay, so we'll get to that when we get to it, and we'll continue moving forward from there. So, I hope that you guys have had a fun time listening to me talk about the James Bond series, and we're going to continue talking about it. So smash that like button, hit subscribe, drop a comment below, let me know what you think of this series so far. What is your personal favorite Bond film? Maybe your top 6, one from each guy, or maybe your top 5 if you don't like the George Lazenby film. You know my feeling on it. But anyway, let me know in the comments below what you think is your favorite James Bond film, and as we say, we will see you on the next one.